Let's pray. Abba, Yah, what a blessing, Father, it is to learn your word, Daddy, to know what it is and the pictures that you paint in your beautiful language, Father, just to get to know your heart and to understand what it is to live a set-apart life, Father, to be who you have created us to be, Father, to live how you wanted us to live, Father. Daddy, right through your word from Genesis to Revelation, there's one picture, and there's a picture of love that starts off with Adam and Chava, with Eve in the Garden of Eden, Father, and it's a picture that goes through your whole word, Daddy. Thank you that you teach us in your word that you've loved us first and that you've set us apart, Father. You've ordained us, and you the one who sanctified us, Father. Abba, it's my prayer today that you'll open our hearts, that we'll understand this message today, Father. That there will be no spirit of confusion present today. There will be nothing that's going to stop this message of yours, Father. I praise you and I honor you, Daddy, and it's my prayer that as you are with us, Daddy, that you'll touch our hearts and that you'll reveal your truth to us. In the name of your Son, Yahuwah, in his mighty name alone we pray. Amen. All right, guys. When I read through the Torah portions for this week, and there's so much, there's really, why does it do this? Sorry, let me just open this. All right. And anyway, the Torah portions for this week mention so much stuff about the priests and about the food. It talks about liquor. It talks about a lot of stuff. But I don't want to touch on all of that today. What I want to speak to you guys about is the picture. And the picture that I saw this week in the Torah portions about being holy or being set apart for the Father. And that's what I want to talk about. But this picture, guys, is not the natural picture that we have is that's clean or that's unclean. You can eat that or you can't eat that. I want to talk more about the spiritual state of being clean or unclean. For so long in my life, whenever I heard the word lukewarm or maybe I pondered about the word myself, then I always had this understanding of lukewarm as not really or being indecisive, not really can decide whether I want to live for the kingdom of the Father or want to step into the kingdom of Satan and maybe being entertained by him. And what the Father's been teaching me for the past few weeks and months is that to be lukewarm, it's not a state of mind. It's more than it's a state of my heart. It's what I feel in my heart. It's the decisions I make in my heart. Because my heart's, by the end of the day, that sets me apart from anything or anyone else. I would like to use what Natalia so many times say when she says, are we eating from the tree of knowledge or are we eating from the Spirit? You see, do I live my life in a natural state or do I walk, like the word says, walk in the Spirit? Do I try and live my life in a spiritual state where I'm always thinking about the Father, I'm always trying to be in his presence. And that's what I want to talk about today. And if you look at everything we've been discussing with the Torah portions for the past couple of weeks, then that's what we're getting back to today. Is what is my spiritual state? Am I set apart for the Father? Because we've seen that I need to be set apart in everything I say, everything I do, how I live my life. That is the picture that we've got of the Mishkan. It's how I enter and the sacrifices I give unto the Father. But then there's one thing missing. There's still one thing short. And we're going to discuss that today with the food we eat. You see, our roles as priests or as children of the kingdom of the Father is to distinguish or to discern that which is for the kingdom of the Father, which is set apart for him, and that which is not. So anything defiled or profane or unclean, we should step away from. Because we should not make that part of our lives. Father has made it very clear in his word that there's a separation between good and evil. You see, right in Genesis, the Father comes and he separates, and he puts a division between light and darkness. And we know in the Word there's separation between life and death. And we find that there's a separation between land and water. And even in the people the Father chose, there was separation. Father chose Jacob and not Esau. Father chose Isaac and not Ishmael. And it's exactly the same with the food we eat. You see, when we want to eat from the table of the Father, when we make that decision to sit at his table, we need to understand, when we read Leviticus 11, there's a certain range of food that is for me. Because the food I'm going to eat there is going to be different than the food in the world. And that's a division the Father creates. A Father comes and he says, this is unclean and this is clean. So what is obedience? According to me and you, and I'm going to ask you a few questions today, and I really want you to ponder about this. You know, if you look at the picture of ponder, we sometimes think it's just a thought. But the thing about the word ponder is that if you really meditate on that thing and you ask the Father to release the truth in that word for him, or to release the truth in that verse from him, then that ponder is no longer a thought, because you take it and you put it in your heart and it becomes a feeling in your heart. So when the Father says, Francois, stay away from that, then I know it becomes a living here in my heart, and no longer just a thought, or no longer just knowledge in my head. Now, this is what I would want to ask you to do when we start with obedience, as we carry on with this message. Is that you remember when we were in schools? Well, when I started with this message, this is one of the first pictures the Father gave me. We all were in school, and we were in a certain class, whether it be math, science, doesn't matter what. But at a certain stage, maybe the teacher was called out to the office, or he or she was called out to go somewhere else. Then they would have normally said the following, that they would have said, do your work, keep quiet, I'll be right back. You see, and the question I want to ask is, I'm going to give you 4 options. I really want you to think about it. Which one of these options, or which child were you in that class? Now, this is what would have happened in a class. I'm going to give you 4 options. The one group of children would have just kept quiet, and they would have gone on with their work. I remember my days in school, I would have called those kids nerds. You see, there's a second group of kids, they continue going on with their work, but they chat with their friend next to them, or maybe at the back or in front of them or something. The third group of children would have not worked at all. They would put their pens or pencils down, but still sit in their chairs and still talk to everyone in the class. And then you get the fourth group. That's a rebellious group. That's the ones that maybe get up from their chairs. They maybe walk around in a class. Maybe they just walk out the door, decide to go to the bathroom. You see, that is the 4 groups of people. So which one of them were you? You see, because the level of my obedience gets determined by my understanding of obedience. I'm going to say it again. The level of my obedience gets determined by my understanding of obedience. Because we can take this back when we grew up. Did I grow up in a house where there was rules, but it was sometimes bent? For example, Dad would have said, go and cut the grass or something. Then I speak to Mom, and Mom says, don't worry about it. You can do it next week. Or maybe I would have been taught that rules were made to be broken. Or even, what about if your father or someone said, listen, don't worry about it. Break the rules. Don't listen to instructions. If you don't get caught, don't worry about it. Or maybe I was taught that instructions and the laws of the land, the laws in my father's house, was there to protect me. It's there to safeguard me. You see, when you've decided which child you were, then we need to see what is my level of understanding of what obedience is. How I understand instructions or rules is how I will either live it or break it. Or do I even care that there's consequences if I break these instructions? So why would we be obedient? Why would I want to listen to my father? You see, in my house, I grew up with a stepdad and my mom, and we were 5 kids. So why would I have listened to my father? Was it out of a natural fear that he will hit me or do something like that to me? Or did I listen to him out of love and respect? The word calls it, we must have fear of the Father, and that fear is an adoration and awe and respect for our Heavenly Father. So why would I have listened to my Father? Do we obey because we are led by our hearts? Do we obey because we're led by the Spirit? Or do we obey because it's just a knowledge we've got in our heads? Are we different than those in the world? What sets us apart? We read in 1 John 5 verses 3 that for this is the love of Yahuwah, that we keep his commandments. So the Father makes it clear. He says, if you love me, obey me. And to me, it's as simple as that. If the Father said so, then it becomes a foundation in my life. So this is the question today to us all. Why do we want to be obedient to the Father? Or are we only obedient to certain of his instructions and not the rest of his instructions? Or can I ask today, is the obedience, my obedience, is it a sacrifice unto the Father? We read in Psalm 69, verse 30 to 31, I praise the name of Yahuwah with a song, and I make him great with thanksgiving. And this pleases Yahuwah more than an ox, a bull with horns and hooves. So you see, it's not what I sacrifice, it's how I sacrifice. So what's the condition of my heart? When I lay something down to the Father, what is that condition? How do I approach the Father? How do I give it to the Father? And it's the same with obedience. What's the character of my heart? David says that worship is greater to Yahuwah than any other offer. So Father wants obedience. Psalm 85 verse 9 says, truly, his deliverance is near to those who fear him, for they esteem the glory to dwell in our land. So while we talk about obedience, a lot of people are going to talk about legalism. So let's quickly understand what is the difference between obedience out of love or legalism. You see, legalism is working or is work of demand. It's something that I feel I must do. So I'm led by knowledge. It's something that I feel I must do. Legalism is law without grace, where people think, or I myself think, that I can impress the Father by obeying his word. And like I said last week, is maybe trying to earn brownie points from the Father. And that's the difference with obedience. Torah observance or obedience to the instructions of the Father is servanthood of love. I'm going to say it again. Obedience to the instructions of the Father is servanthood of love. You see, servanthood means obedience, knowing that he is the king and I'm a servant in his court. So if the king calls me and gives me something to do, then out of my servanthood and out of my love for my king, I get up. Like Isaiah said, here I am, I get up and I go and I do it. So we find there's one law, one instruction, one Torah for one bride. We're one body of the Messiah. So getting back to the message we're going to talk about today, what is clean and what is unclean, what is holy and what is profane. I know there's, for example, me, I've got friends in my life that truly loves the Father, that follow his instructions. But there's one thing they missing in their lives, and that is still the food they eat. They still choose a food range or a food group that the Father says we're not allowed to eat. Getting back to my question, how obedient are we to the word of the Father? Isn't it interesting that the first time Abba deals with the area of holiness is with food? Talking about in Leviticus now. So when Father starts talking about be holy for I am holy, he talks about food. As mentioned before, Father establishes boundaries between what we can eat and can't eat. How can I have a heart's desire to sit at the table of the Father when the Father says, come and sit at my table. Come, I'll be your provider, but we still choose to sit at the table of the enemy. We still long for the food of Egypt. Leviticus 11 says, if we read Leviticus 11, I'm not going to read Leviticus 11 here, guys, and we all know this, and I want to ask you this. Go and study Leviticus 11, as the Father leads you. And if you've got questions regarding that, please WhatsApp myself or Natalia, and then we'll assist you with that. So I'm not going to go through what is clean or unclean regarding the birds of the air, the fish in the sea, or the lands on the animal on the lands. Because a lot has been said about that. And like I say, what I want to talk about is a spiritual picture regarding the profane and that which is holy. So when we read Leviticus 10, verse 10, it says, so as to make a distinction between the set apart and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean. This is the first time I read this verse, or I really understood this verse when I studied or started the message this week. I've always been taught and always understood that there's only a decision to make between clean and unclean. I've never seen this or never understood that there's actually more to unclean and clean. Father talks about holy or set apart and profane. And I really had to go and look, what is the difference between set apart food or profane and what is clean and unclean? And we read the same in Ezekiel 44:23, and it says, and they are to teach my people the difference between the set apart and the profane, and make them know what is unclean and clean. You see, so let's start with a simple question. What is set apart food, or what is kosher food? And if we start with kosher food, again, it's not a message I'm going to get in today because there's a lot to be said about kosher food as well. But from what I read and how I understand it, there's a difference between biblical kosher and rabbinical kosher. Rabbinical kosher, it is instructions or guidelines or law that was added onto the word of the Father. So as the Father gave his set apart food or his guidelines for kosher foods in the Torah, rabbinical has added to that. And they've added quite a lot to that. So I'm just going to talk about biblical, what the Father says is set apart. Not what man says is set apart. Not what man says we must eat or should not eat. I'm talking about what Abba Yah described and what he says is set apart food for us. So we look at set apart, and we know this word kadosh or kadesh means holy, is to be set apart. It means to be sanctified. It means to be consecrated. But this is where the spiritual picture now comes in with the food. It means that which is dedicated unto the Father. You see, because a set apart can be a place as well, like we studied with the Mishkan, it was set apart for the Father. Set apart can be things as well, like we saw the furniture in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, was set apart for the Father for his purpose. I could not take the menorah home as a light on my way to the home. No, it stayed in the tabernacle. It was set apart. It had that purpose. So Father is much more against profanity than he established. Father's against profanity. And we read in the word that he says that if we do not keep the Sabbath holy, then we should be stoned. Let me explain to you what profanity is. To be profane, that word profane is a Latin word. It comes from the word profanos. And this profanos is broken up in two words, pro and then phanom. Pro means against. Phanom means temple. So profanos means against the temple. So to profane something is to do something against this temple. And we know the word, and we've been teaching it since we were whatever age, that my body is now the temple of the Ruach. This is where the Spirit of the Father, the set apart Spirit of the Father now stays within me. This is his home now. So unclean, which is the Hebrew word chol, which means profane or common. That profane means doing something against the temple of the Father. So we need to learn to discern between holy, that which is holy, and that which is common, or that is from the world. Holiness are distinct from anything that is common or ordinary. You see, because if you look at the word profane as well in Hebrew, or the Hebrew word chol, then it means something vulgar, but it also says man-focused. It also means man-initiated or man-designed. So it's something from man, it's something from the world, it's not from the Father. That which is set apart is from the Father. There's a clear indication of the difference between the natural realm and the spiritual realm. And we're starting to see this picture now. Then we talk about the clean and unclean. Like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about that today. We're just going to look into the spiritual pictures, because there's a couple of verses in the Word of the Father that a lot of people, and even teachings I've heard, where people pull the context complete, or pull the verses completely out of context. So let's quickly look at clean and unclean, as it says in Leviticus as well. Unclean is the word tamai, and it means defiled. Unclean or impure. But it also says to compromise. And I like this. The next one, it says ethically polluted. Tahor, which is the opposite, which is the clean, means, yes, clean, but it means wholeness. It means to be unified with the Father. You see, so in both cases, in set apart and in tahor, that which is clean, we see that when we obey, we complete in the Father. We whole in the Father. We one with the Father. But when we disobey, then there's two different aspects here. It's to be defiled or to be profane. So profane we see now as the spiritual picture. To be defiled is that which comes into this vessel, into the flesh. But from there, it pulls through to the spiritual as well. And we're going to see that now. So tahor is doing the things that will bring wholeness between me and the Father. Is to obey His word, to eat what He has set apart for me to eat. If my focus is the Father's presence, to have communion with Him, then I can't be unclean. So we just finished the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And we read in Galatians 5 verses 9, it says, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And you ladies that bake and prepare food with yeast, and you know, just a knife tip of yeast leavens the whole batch. And that's what the Father says. He says, Francois, my son, if you live a set-apart life, then you cannot compromise with the world. Because for one night, if Francois goes into the world and I party and I drink or I do whatever I used to do in my previous life, you want to call it that, then the Father says, I've profaned myself, I've tamai myself, I've defiled myself. I'm unclean to Him now. And then I need to cleanse myself before the Father. Interesting to note that the verse, be holy for I am holy, it's mentioned 5 times in the word of the Father. And of that 5 times it's mentioned, be holy for I am holy, 3 times it's mentioned with food. So 3 times when the Father talks about the food we must eat and stay away from that which He did not prescribe us to eat, He says, be set apart for I'm set apart. Francois, keep yourself apart from that meat or from that food. 3 times the Father does that. The other time He talks about the Sabbath, and the other time He talks about our relationship with our parents, where He says, be set apart for I am set apart. We read in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 16 to 18, and what union has the dwelling place of Yah with idols? For you are a dwelling place of the living Eloah. As Yahuwah has said, I shall dwell in them and walk among them, and I shall be their Eloah, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out of them, come out among them, and be separated, says Avayah. And do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you. And I shall be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahuwah the Almighty. As well, 1 Corinthians 3, 16 to 17, do you not know that you are a dwelling place of Yahuwah, and that the Spirit of Yahuwah dwells in you. If anyone destroys the dwelling place of Abba Yah, he shall destroy him. For the dwelling place of Yahuwah is set apart, which you are. You see, over and over, Father talks about this dwelling place, this temple. I should not do anything profane with this temple. I should not do anything that's against this temple where the Father's Spirit lives in. So am I obeying the Father in my life, or is there still bacon and shrimp on my table? Imagine the following, brothers and sisters. Imagine I had a bride, and I bought pork chops and pork ribs, and I bride for my family just the way I know they like it. And my wife prepares this nice salad and pap or whatever. But when we sit down to the table, I ask the Father's blessing over the food. Can you imagine? I pray and I ask the Father, Father, sanctify this food onto our bodies. Father, may this food nourish this body. Am I not going now completely against the word of the Father? If he said in Leviticus, don't eat certain food, and I willingly went to the shops, bought those food, prepared the food the way my family likes it, put it on the table, and now I ask the Father to bless that unholy, that profane, and that unclean, defiled meat onto our bodies. My question is this: aren't we abusing the Father? Because the Father doesn't change. Whether we read Malachi or Hebrews, he says he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He does not change. So am I abusing him or trying to abuse him? Because can I use the blessing of the Father in that way to sanctify anything and everything I do? Because a lot of times we must say, yeah, but the Father knows my heart. No, brother and sister, we know the word of the Father, and we must keep to that word of his. Imagine inviting the Messiah to dinner again, and I put prawns and all kinds of unclean seafood on the table. Do we really think he's going to eat of it? I don't think so. We as the bride have been put on a special diet. We need to eat what the Father gave us to eat, what the Father said we should eat. Again, imagine this. Myself and Hanley, my wife, we've been married now for 21 years. But can you imagine we go out to a restaurant, to a Mexican restaurant, and I invite all of you to come and join us. And now we go to this Mexican restaurant, and I know she doesn't eat spicy food. I'm not even talking about hot, fiery food. I'm talking about just spicy food. She doesn't eat spicy food. Now we go to a Mexican restaurant, and one of you guys maybe sit next to Hanley and ask her, but why don't you eat? And she's going to say, but I don't eat this food. Aren't you going to think by yourself, really, guys, you've been married 21 years. Surely you know your wife. Surely you love your wife to know that you can't bring her to a restaurant like this. You see, because are we going with our hearts or are we obeying with our heads? Because it's something that I want to do. And that is the question today. And we're going to get into certain verses now. But before we do, Ephesians 2, verse 17 to 22 says, and having come, he brought as good news, peace to you who are far off, and peace to those near, because through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. So then you are no longer strangers and foreigners. What did we discuss last week? Is when I go to the Father, when I lay my life down to him, when he sacrificed or circumcised my heart, then I'm no longer a stranger. I'm no longer sojourning, because I become part of Israel. I become part of the household of the Messiah. I become part of the kingdom, and I submit to a king. It says, but fellow citizens of the set apart ones and members of the household of Yeshua, having been built upon the foundations of the emissaries and the prophets, the Tanakh, which is the word of the Father. Yahushua, the Messiah himself, being chief cornerstone, in whom all the building being joined together grows into a set-apart dwelling place in Yahuwah, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of Yahuwah in the Spirit. You see, when we start obeying the word of the Father, and the word of the Father, like we've just read, there is not just the Torah, it's not just the 5 books of the Old Testament, of the Foundation Testament. It's the word of the Father, which is everything about Him. If we obey that, and we set apart for Him, and He calls us righteous, He circumcises our hearts, and we become part of this family. We become part of this body of the Messiah. But that, my brother and sister, includes the food that we eat as well. That includes that stuff that we should drink as well. For I am Yahuwah, I do not change. Malachi 3 verse 6. So who is causing these changes in our lives? Or maybe should I ask, who's causing this confusion? Or what is causing the confusion? Do I understand the word of the Father? If I read something and I don't understand it, do I really ask the set-apart Spirit of the Father to teach me, to show me, and to guide me? Or maybe to send someone on my way so that that person can teach me? We read in 1 Corinthians 14:33, for Abba is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as all His assemblies of the set-apart ones. In certain translations, it says a God of of confusion. Certain translations read that, says that Abba Yah is not the God of confusion. So if Yahuwah, our Father, our Heavenly King, if He's not the God of confusion, then who is the God of confusion? And we know it's the enemy. That's why we should ask the set-apart Spirit to guide us and help us. So let's start with the first verse. All the other verses we're going to do now, so 2 or 3 verses. Guys, we need to understand context. I can't just take a verse out of the Bible and say, yes, that's what the Father said. I'm going to go according to that. It makes sense to me. That's the way I understand it. That's the way I'm going to live it. The reason for that, that's why you find over 40,000 Christian denominations worldwide. If we are one Spirit, one word, one bride, why is there over 40,000 Christian denominations worldwide? Because we don't always understand the word of the Father. So as we go forward, may the Spirit of the Father just reveal the truth to you and to me, to all of us. So let's read the first one. Mark 7 verse 15. There is no matter that enters a man from outside, which is able to defile him, but it is what comes out of him that defiles the man. So let's understand this chapter first. We've spoken about what is defile and what is profane. In this verse, twice it says, there is no matter that enters a man from outside, which is able to defile him, but it is what comes from the inside that defiles the mind. This defile, twice, is the wrong translation. If you go and look at the original word, it uses profane. It's a correspondence of the strong word number G2840. So it's not defiled, it's profane. And we know the spiritual picture about the profanity is that which is set apart or set against the temple. So if we read this verse, then it says, there's no matter that enters a man from outside which is able to profane him, but is what comes out from him that profanes the man. So let's get to the context of this now. Let's start at verse 1 from Mark 7. It says, and the Pharisees and some of the scribes assembled to him, having come from Jerusalem, and seeing some of his taught ones eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Yehudim, the Jews, do not eat unless they wash their hands thoroughly, holding fast to the tradition of the elders. So we see here the taught ones, the disciples of the Messiah, they were busy having lunch and they ate bread. And here comes the Pharisees and they see this. And they spoke to the Messiah and say, but why do your disciples defile themselves? So that is the context of this verse. So they're not talking about food here. The Pharisees talks about the food, the defilement thereof. But the Messiah, when he speaks about profanity. He speaks about the spiritual picture and not the natural picture. You see, profanity is we need to see the spiritual picture here and understand the heart has made a choice, a decision. When I see this piece of meat or fish, let's say shrimp, whatever, that I'm not allowed to eat, is that I make a choice with my heart. I make a choice to eat that prawn. So I make a choice to eat that chop. You see, before I've eaten that piece of meat, I've already defiled or profaned my heart because I've made the choice. It's like I said earlier, I willingly went to the shops, went and bought those pork chops, and I started buying it. So I willingly did it. I willingly went against the word of the Father. I've not even eaten or eat that piece of meat yet. My body is not consumed it yet, but I've defiled. So we're talking about the spiritual defilement here already, because I've made the choice to go and do it. That is what the Son of Man talks about here. Holiness or set-apart lifestyle is obedience. Profanity is disobedience. So disobedience is not just always the act of disobedience. And that's what the Messiah came and taught us in Matthew 4, Matthew 5, when he says, you've heard it read, but I say. You see, when I'm planning something, when I'm planning to commit a murder, he says, I've already done it. When I'm planning to eat that pork chop, he says, I've already done it. So disobedience is not always just the act. It's the planning, it's the thought thereafter. It's the obedience out of my heart. Am I committed to go and do that? So that's why I said earlier, disobedience is not always in knowledge. We must look at the spiritual picture here as well, that it's a decision that I made in my heart. When we walk in sin or rebel against Abba's word, we prove what is really in our hearts. That's the pork itself. It's not doing the profaning. You see, like I said, I've not even maybe eaten the pork chop yet, but I've made the choice in my heart already. And that is what he talks about here in this verse. He says, it's not that which coming, because I've not eaten the pork chop yet, but that which comes out of the heart. So I've already made the decision to go and buy it and to eat. Rebellion is the issue here. That which is born in the heart comes out of our hearts and our mouths. We read in Matthew 12:34, it says, brood of adders, how are you able to speak what is good, being wicked? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. You see, the Father says here, if we are profane in our hearts, then that's going to come out of our mouths. That's the way we're going to live our lives, a life of disobedience. Being holy is about the food we eat, yes. But to be set apart for the Father, it's a heart's decision. It's a decision I make in my heart first before this vessel actually do the act, before I actually speak something. The heart, the Hebrew for that, the lev, there where the Father's ruach live. You see, because if the Father's ruach is in me, he lives in my lev, in that inner being of me. So if I'm obedient to him and I listen to me, and I listen to him, then he's in my heart, and that is what will come out of my mouth. But if I made the decision to be disobedient, then I allow the character of the enemy into me. I allow the character of the enemy to start consuming my heart. So I'm no longer set apart for the Father, but I've been profaned. Yahushua explained that the heart that sins violates the Torah that makes him spiritually unclean. So the Messiah was explaining to the Pharisees to turn back to Torah, the written word of the Father and not man's opinions. The disciples were eating bread, not meat. So they were eating bread here, guys, not meat. So it had nothing to do with clean and unclean foods. So that's why I say we must understand the context of this chapter. What the Pharisees saw was this dirty hands. What Yahushua saw is the spirit that is dirty of the Pharisees. And he used that to teach them something. So he used what they saw to teach them a lesson or to give them a message. So it's not the fruit that defile Adam and Eve. Let me quickly explain this. This is what I've just explained to you. I understand the spiritual picture here, guys. It's not the fruit that profaned Adam and Eve. It was the choice to eat the fruit. It was the choice to be disobedient to the Father. Because they were set apart for the Father. They were obedient. But then they made a choice to be disobedient. And that choice, before they've eaten the apple, that's what made them unclean, spiritually unclean. So do we now understand why so many of the writers in the Word of the Father talks about a pure heart, talks about a clean heart? Because it's a spiritual picture here, guys. Spiritually, I need to be set apart for the Father. My heart, my character needs to be set apart for the Father. I need to choose Him, Tselem Elohim, in the image of the Most High. And my character needs to be like the Father's. To sit at His table. To eat what he told me to eat. Let's talk about Peter and the vision in Acts 10. And again here, guys, we need to understand context. If you go and read Acts 10 from verse 1, then you see it talks about this captain of this legion or this regiment of the Romans. And the guy's name was Cornelius. You see, the picture is this, that if you had to see this captain of the legions, then initially you would have thought this is a pagan man, that this is a heathen. But from verse 1, it clearly states that Cornelius feared the Father. He had a relationship with the Father. You see, he was set apart for the Father. So that is the spiritual picture here. Cornelius was obedient. In the flesh, in the natural, you would have looked at the man and say, he's a pagan. He's a heathen for maybe. So that is the context. And now we need to understand where Peter comes from to be part of this context. You see, Peter was a Jew. And now you must understand the culture of that time. Because the Jews did not mix with the other nations. According to the Jews, this set-apart nation of the Father, they were holy. They saw themselves as set apart and holy unto the Father. So anyone else outside of the Jews or Israel, they were unholy. To maybe communicate with any of those pagans or those heathens was to them is like eating a piece of pork or rat or pig or something. Do you understand this picture? And the same with Peter, with all of them. As a Jewish boy, he grew up with the Torah. They studied the Torah since they were 8, 9 years old. So this is what they knew. This is their understanding of what is holy and what is not holy. And then we read Acts 10, from verse 10 to 13. And he became hungry. This is Peter now. And he became hungry and wished to eat. But while they were preparing, he fell into a trance. And he saw the heaven opened, and a certain vessel like a great sheet bound at the four corners, descending to him and led down to the earth, in which were all kinds of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts and creeping creatures, and the birds of the heaven. And a voice came to him, saying, "Rise up, Kepha, slay and eat." You see, so let's again understand this context further, is that Peter is at this place and it says in the middle of the day. So around about lunchtime, he got hungry. So the other guys went and they started preparing the food. And Peter went into a trance. And in this trance, this vision that he saw, understanding now he was hungry. So this vision that he saw was the sheet coming down with all kinds of animals on it. And the voice said, "Rise, Peter, slay and eat." All right, so this is the verse that, or verses that most people say, but all things are holy now, we can eat all food. But we started learning the context of this chapter, of a so-called pagan man that is Torah observant, that's set apart for the Father, sending people out to go and call Peter because he's got this relationship with the Father, and a messenger of the Father appeared to Cornelius and told him to send people to go and collect people. You see, and now Father needs to teach Peter a lesson. Father wants to teach him something, because Father knows the identity of Peter. He knows that the mindset of Peter, and he needed to break that mindset of Peter. That's why he used what is available to Peter now to teach him a lesson now, or to teach him something now. Remember that what we've learned in the previous one as well. Father used what's available to teach us a lesson, or to teach or give us a message. You see, when the Messiah walked in the fields, he would have taken a barley or a piece of corn or whatever, maize or wheat, and then he used that to teach his students or teach the disciples about the kingdom of the Father. You see, because we, firstly, spiritual, but we live in this natural world, in this physical world. And the Father created us. So the Father knows that sometimes he needs to give us a picture. And that's what he did here with Peter. He gave Peter a picture of unclean food. So this is what happened now. So that sheet came down with all the animals on it, and Peter fallen in a trance, and the Father says, "Rise, Kepha, slay and eat." So this image was about the barrier, the food, or saw other nations outside of the Jewish nation as being heathens, as being pagans. And Abba wanted to break the walls down. You see, Father used the food because he was hungry at that stage. And we also need to see this. Like I said, Peter moved with the Messiah. Peter was taught by the Messiah himself. So the Messiah never said, all food are clean to eat now. So because he moved with the Messiah, he ate what the Messiah ate. He drank what the Messiah drank. He lived the way the Messiah lived. And that is the picture we need in our lives as well, is to eat what he said we must eat, to do what he said we must do, to speak what he said we need to speak. We read in Acts 10:14 that Peter says, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. So again, we see the spiritual picture and the natural picture. I've never eaten anything profane or what defiled. When we continue reading Acts 10, we don't see that Peter went and he slaughtered a pig and started eating. In fact, Peter understood the prophetic picture here. And if we read in Acts 10:28, Peter says, he says, Yahuwah has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. You see, so Peter understood this picture. That's why he went with the messengers to Cornelius, to go and give him the good news, to go and talk to him about the Messiah. So this is the lesson out of this, is to see people as the Father sees them. You see, because the character in our hearts is what message does the people see of me? When I walk in the street, when I go to work, when I move in my community, what message is my heart telling them about me? Who's living in my heart? Is it the Spirit of the Father or some other evil spirit? I hope you do understand this verse. Let's go on with the next. We read in Genesis 1, Father came and he created all beings. If you start reading from verse 20 to verse 25, where he created the birds in the air, the fish in the sea, and the land, the animals on the land. And I want to read just a bit later on in Genesis, around about 23, 24, and it says, and Yahuwah said, let the earth bring forth the living being according to its kind, livestock and creeping creatures and beasts of the earth, according to its kind. And it came to be so. And Yahuwah made the beast of the earth according to its kind, livestock according to its kind, and all that creep on the earth according to its kind. And Yahuwah saw that it was good. That good is the Hebrew word tov. In fact, the word tov, it means very good. So when you go and study that, a bright picture of the word tov, then you see that it means practical and functional. In other words, it's saying it works according to purpose. It's like you would have, for example, your wristwatch. And this is an image a lot of people use, but it's a simple image and it works. It's like you bought your watch for one purpose, and that is to keep time, to give you the time. So whether you've got it for 1 year or 50 years, as long as that battery lasts, that's what it's going to do. It's going to give you time. So your watch is functioning according to purpose. And that's what the Father says. When He created, everything He created, whether it be the trees, whether it be the sea, the lights in the sky, whether it be the animals, He says it's tough, very good, functioning according to purpose. So there's a purpose to all animals that were created. There's a purpose to all the birds in the air, to all the creeping and crawling insects, the animals on the land and the fish in the seas. There's purpose to everyone. Some are food, but some's got other purposes. And we're going to look into that today. So let's look at the image of Tov regarding the pig. What is the purpose and what does a pig do? A pig is a scavenger. Its purpose is to clean up its surroundings, and pigs play a vital role in our ecosystems. Pigs are not fussy eaters. They are often fed waste crops and food byproducts that humans can't eat. You see, so many times we have been asked, but if we're not allowed to eat pork, then why was it created? And the Father says, we're not allowed to eat it. So if we're not allowed to eat, let's look at its purpose. You see, pigs were domesticated by humans. They were wild animals, cleaning the cities and their surroundings, eating all kinds of unclean flesh and products. So pigs weren't created for us to eat. Pigs weren't made for us as food. Again, going back to being holy, being set apart for the Father. He says, do not eat bacon. Do not eat pork chops. Do not eat anything from a pig. Because it was not created as food. What is our heart's desire in obedience? Is it to please the Father, to be set apart for Him? Isaiah 66, verse 15 to 17, we read, those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves at the gardens after one in the midst, eating flesh of pigs and the abominations and the mouse and the snatched away together, declares Yahuwah. For by fire and by His sword Yahuwah shall judge all flesh. And the slain of Yahuwah shall be many. For look, Yahuwah comes with fire and with His chariots like a whirlwind to render His displeasure with burning and His rebuke with flames of fire. Or am I profane? That's a spiritual picture I want to look at today. I don't want to. Vis allemaal op die fiber. So I don't want to talk about the clean and the unclean, but only that which is set apart for the Father. Let's look at this verse. Luke 10, verses 8. And into what city you enter, and they receive you, eat whatever is placed before you. So again, let's understand the context of what has been said here. So the disciples were called by the Messiah to go out into the world. And he tells them just to take that clothing on their bodies and to go into the world. And then it says, eat where you come. And he also tells them not to talk to the strangers next on the roads as they move. So we should interpret this some would interpret this to mean that we should eat whatever is set before us, whether it be clean or unclean. No questions asked. We should always understand that Yahushua was the living word of the Father. He knows the word and He never changed. And he never taught His disciples, His Talmudim, He never taught them to change the word, but rather to keep it, because it doesn't change. It's a living word. This is the same word that Abraham had to obey, that Isaac, Jacob, Noah, Moses, David, the Talmudim had to obey. We need to obey. So what is he talking about here? You see, the context is the following. as the disciples went into the world to go and teach the word of the Father, Yahushua tells them, where you get to, stay there. He says, if you're welcomed by the Son of Peace, and we know the Son of Peace is the Messiah. He says, if you're welcomed by the Son of Peace into that community or into that home, then stay there. But then he says, eat whatever is served. And we need to understand this, that disciples or the Talmudim, the apostles, they would not stay in a place that is unclean. They would not stay with the pagan people. They will stay with those that are Torah observant. And Yahushua told them, when you stay, eat what is served. So what the Father is saying is here, he said, don't be fussy eaters. Eat what has been served. So we need to understand the context of this subject, of this chapter, to understand this verse as well. So don't be fussy eaters. Eat what is being served. I want to finish up with the following. Father's always put limits or borders on how we should worship him and what we do, how we live our lives, how we eat. And my question today is, do we always long, like the Israelites when they got into the wilderness, do we always long for the food of Egypt? For that which kept us in bondage? Or are we prepared to move ahead? Because the Father has set a table apart just for his bride, where there's no common food, there's no defilement. We're set apart for him. Again, like I was said earlier regarding Adam and Chava, is we need to understand that picture. So that even if the food looks good, even if the food that's prepared smells good, if the word of the Father says it's unclean, then it's unclean. So may Abba Yah guide us in this walk we've got with him. May he guide our steps and our hearts. May we dedicate our hearts, my brother and sister, may we dedicate our hearts unto the Father. May our hearts be set apart for his purpose, what he's ordained us for, what he's sanctified us for. Let's pray. Our mighty Abba Father, Daddy, we bless you, Father. We glorify your mighty name. Thank you that we know that you are set apart. And Abba, because you are set apart, we need to be set apart for you, Father. Daddy, you say the way is narrow. May we not be obedient out of works, but may we be obedient out of servanthood, Father. May we have a heart that wants to serve you above all. May we have a heart that seeks your presence and seeks your will in our lives, Abba. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you for the living word. Thank you that we can know, like it said in Malachi 3, that you do not change. Your character does not change. Your word does not change, Father. You are who your word says you are. And you are the true living Alua. We praise you and we honor you and we thank you for a time like today. We thank you for this communion, Father, that we can interact with each other. Abba, may you be with us in the week that's coming. May you keep us safe. May you guard us. And may your set-apart spirit guide us, Father, to be a set-apart nation, to be a set-apart people unto you. Thank you, Abba. Again, we praise you, we honor you. We ask that your kingdom will come in our lives, that your kingdom will come in our relationship with each other, that your kingdom will come in our relationship with our spouses and with our children. And may your will be done. And in the name of Yahushua, the Son of the Most High King, we pray and we ask in your mighty name alone. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Toda rabah.
Thank you.